This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 578, entitled Women's Conditional Voting Right. Description. This flyer proposes the establishment of gender crimes courts that prosecute women for gender crimes committed against men, with one of the punishments being stripping these gender criminal women of the right to vote. Examples of such gender crimes against men would be manslavery, divorce rape, forced fathering, false rape accusations, etc. Now the flyer itself. Women's Conditional Voting Right by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Masculist arguments are so much more powerful than feminist arguments, and women oppress men so much worse than vice versa, that the longer that monoconscious feminists remain monoconscious, and the longer fluffies take to fit up, the angrier and more hateful biconscious masculists will become towards them, and be increasingly motivated to punish women who don't fit up and who don't become biconscious. So it seems obvious to me that men, masculistic men, who in time will be most men, will be strongly motivated to punish women who don't fit up and who don't become biconscious. What is the best way to punish women for these afflictions that they commit on men? One obvious way is to take away their right to vote, making the female voting right conditional. That is, masculistic men can impose conditions on women before they are given the right to vote by men. Just how could such an idea be implemented, and under what conditions could a woman be denied the right to vote? These questions certainly need more thought, but here are some initial ideas on my part. I do see millions of men in the next few years becoming increasingly angry and hateful at fluffies and monoconscious feminists, for there will be growing support from men, masculistic men, for a form of punishment of women who remain fluffy, manslaving, divorce raping vermin, or monoconscious feminists. I anticipate that in time, millions of men will push for a form of conditional voting right for women as a form of punishment of women who do not grow up and who expect to parasite off men, manslaving them, or who fail to see how women oppress men and keep bitching on men for the relatively minor ways that men oppress women, when from the masculinist viewpoint, these monoconscious feminazis are profound hypocrites, given that women oppress men far worse. But since monoconscious feminism is a profoundly misandrist, gynocentric ideology, it teaches women nothing about how women oppress men, since it is so solipsistic, so women-oriented, that monoconscious feminists don't even care how much they oppress men. So off the top of my head, I imagine that I am a masculist gender politician a few years from now, being a member of the masculist half of a gender equality committee, that's a GEC, a GEC, in a Western country's parliament. And I'm starting to think about punishing women, monoconscious feminists and fluffies, by taking away such women's right to vote, by creating a women's conditional voting right. What criteria would I use to exclude certain categories of women from being given the right to vote? In principle, I would exclude manslaving fluffies, monoconscious feminists, women who commit female gender crimes against men, for example, divorce rapists, paternity fraudsters, false rape accusers, etc. I would set up the equivalent of the Spanish Inquisition, called the Masculist Inquisition in brackets, which was the topic of one of my previous flyers, number 356, entitled The Masculist Inquisition, close brackets. The role of this institution would be to punish women who commit gender crimes against men, by at least stripping them of the right to vote. Fluffies who try to divorce rape a man would be eligible to be brought before such an inquisitor, that is, a judge in a gender crimes court, who would rule on the individual case of a particular woman whose case is brought up by the man she is trying to divorce and to extract resources from him. Masculists complain bitterly about how divorcing fathers are butchered in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. The divorce rate in the US is about 50%, and 70% of those divorces are initiated by women. A fluffy, who wants to divorce and extract resources from her ex-husband can be taken to the Masculist Gender Crimes Court and be prosecuted for being a fluffy, manslaving, divorce-raping parasite by a judge and then stripped of her right to vote. Probably by the time that such gender crime courts exist, so will the reform of the divorce courts, so that alimony is thrown out, custody of the children is joint by default, the owner of the house gets to keep it, and the women and men are both expected to be FIPs, and thus handled by the court using the principle of financial independence. In the case of a woman who's a fluffy, who by definition has not bothered to FIP up, that is, has not bothered to get a career-competent education, who expects to live off the money and labour of a man for decades, is seen by the Gender Crimes Court, that is, the Masculist Inquisition, as a criminal, a gender criminal, who is seen as a manslaver, as a divorce rapist, as vermin, and hence to be punished for committing a decades-lasting gender crime against a man, and hence hated, not only by the ex-husband, but by society, which is aiming to wipe out such women by forcing them to FIP up, given that they have half a century career window in which society expects them to be FIP and pull their own financial weight, and punishes those who don't. So in such an age that is hopefully not too many years away from the time of writing, that's 2022, in which the divorce courts are men-faired, then if the woman tries to extract resources from the ex-husband, then the ex-husband can take her to the Gender Crimes Court and have her right to vote stripped from her for her gender criminal crime. She will not get alimony. She will not get sole custody of the kids. She will not get half of his stuff and half of his wealth. She will not get his house. What she will get is have her right to vote stripped from her. Of course, the ex-husband can threaten her with this, so that she will be highly reluctant to go ahead with a court case to extract resources from her ex-husband, since the divorce courts will have been men-faired by then. This is already the case in some countries. For example, in the country I currently live in, Australia, divorcing men are treated much better than in many other Western countries. That is, they are given joint custody by default. Alimony is thrown out. But Oz, that's Australia slang, still gives the two divorcing parties half of the wealth and stuff. So those fluffy women who have no talent and did not contribute much to the acquisition of wealth by the man get to rob him of half of his stuff and wealth. It takes decades for gender legislation reform to spread across the planet. Look at the timetable worldwide for giving women the vote, the right to vote, in the first place. The first country in the world to do this was New Zealand in 1893, whereas France did the same half a century later in 1944. So some countries have already partially, in capital letters, implemented the men-fairing of the divorce courts, but not the majority. Such reforms seem to take decades. What about monoconscious feminists? How to punish them? To be punishable, these women would need to have committed some gender crime. For example, paternity fraud, pill lying, in brackets, that is forced fathering, or have made a false rape accusation, in brackets. Research shows that about half of rape accusations by women are false, that is, are fictions invented by the woman, close brackets. If a man can prove that a woman has committed such a crime, that is a gender crime against a man, then he can take her to the gender crimes court and try to prosecute her. Since a rape usually gets a man 10 years in jail, a proven false rape accusation ought to get a woman a similar term in jail, operating on the principle that what is good for the goose is good for the gander. So a gender crimes court judge should sentence a woman who makes a false rape accusation to 10 years in jail. By the time such courts exist, probably the para, in brackets, paternity rejection right, will have been legislated. So a man who feels he has been force-fathered by a woman has the right to opt out of paternity by filling in a government paternity rejection form. So that if the woman goes ahead with the pregnancy, she takes full financial responsibility for the costs of the kid. If the man can prove the woman lied to him about taking the pill, then he can prosecute her for forced fathering and have her put in jail. It will be the task of the masculist half of the GECs, G-E-Cs, Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments, which by definition consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, to ensure that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, close brackets, to make a complete list of gender crimes that women can commit against men and their respective punishments by law. These GECs will make a new set of masculist, men-faring gender laws, so that the massive gender crimes that women commit today against men are punished and prosecuted. Stripping gender criminal women of the vote will be one of the punishments that these GECs will impose on women by law. Since all of this is far from being the case today, we masculists have a lot of work to do in persuading society that the above needs to be done. So guys, fellow masculists, roll up your sleeves and get to work. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 570 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.